Hey guys, it's Nikolai Pavlov. It's good to see you. I'm back with some Power BI tips and tricks. In my previous videos, we looked into Power Query. We learned how to import, clean, and transform data. But today we're going to do something else. We're going to look at DAX, which stands for Data Analysis Expressions. I think when it comes to building reports in Power BI, DAX is probably the single most important thing that every analyst and a user must know. In all of my previous videos, we've been really just focusing on Power Query. And Power Query is built on the M language, which is a different thing. The easy way to understand is that the M language equals Power Query. So after we imported, cleaned, and transformed some of our data, right? After all that is done, and you're about to start analyzing information and asking questions about your data, then you are in the DAX territory. You know, at the level of a business user in Power BI, you are going to use DAX in two main ways, which is first is creating calculated columns, and second is creating measures. So calculated columns are essentially formula-based columns that are created as the extension of your table. These columns are evaluated for each row and created based on data that has already been loaded into a data model. So it's kind of similar to building columns in Excel, right? When you have two columns, and based on these two columns, you're building the third column. Measures, on the other hand, are something very different. Measures are formulas which create dynamic values depending on the context in which they are used. Unlike calculated columns, measures do not live in tables, which means they don't create extra columns. And that is why they do not take up extra space in the data model. And many analysts prefer to use measures instead of calculated columns when all things are being equal. I mean, obviously there's situations when you gotta use a calculated column, but with all the things being equal, a measure is usually preferred. Actually, DAX was first introduced in PowerPivot, and if you're a strong PowerPivot or Excel user, then you're already familiar with DAX. For those of you who didn't get to use PowerPivot too much, many DAX formulas will still remind Excel, and I think the transition from one to another will not be hard. There's one important thing to remember, however, which, you know, at its core goes back to the difference between the spreadsheet, cell-based model, and column-based table model. We all know that Excel performs calculations over cells, where each cell has its unique coordinates. DAX, on the other hand, works only on columns and tables. To really understand what I mean, let's take a look at some of the examples. So here are simple sample tables that I got, and our task is to find price and revenue. In Excel, obviously, we would use a VLOOKUP to bring values from the orange table here based on product ID from the main table. We'll show the table, the second column. You guys know all that, right? And then after we bring these values from the orange table using a VLOOKUP, then we will simply multiply cell F3, right, to cell G3. That's how Excel works, and in my case, I formatted my data as a table, so that's why when I build the first formula, all the other ones in the table automatically filled, right? What made Excel really straightforward and easy to understand was its cell-based nature. The understanding is really that I can manipulate and control every single cell that I want. So if quantity here, if I want to change this to 1, I can do it, and only the revenue number will change, right? So I can change, I can modify every single cell in this table. That's how we work in Excel. Okay, let's go to Power BI. In Power BI, I have already imported these two tables. They are exactly the same two tables, right? With the blue table is table number 1 and the orange table is table number 2. And here we also have to do the same thing, right? We need to find revenue. We have to find price, and then based on price, we gotta find revenue. What will I do in Power BI? First of all, I will build a new column. I go to the modeling tab, and then I create the button. I click the button new column. I will name this column price. And here's a thing to remember, there's no VLOOKUP function in Power BI. So that's why we're going to replace it with something very similar to VLOOKUP, but I think it's more powerful than VLOOKUP actually. The formula is called related. And when I open brackets, I see that Power BI offers me table 2 price. So I will pick the column price from the second table, and that's it. What I did is I used the formula related, which brings another columns from another table. And when I click OK, I have my column price all filled in. How did it do that, right? For me, first it seemed really crazy. Like, how did it know which values to put where in which row, right? So it turns out that Power BI, the DAX is really smart, and it found that product ID in my first table has matching values with product ID in my second table, and it automatically brought all the price values based on the product column. Once we have price, the rest is easy. What we can do is we can build new column again, and this time we're going to name it revenue equals, we just have to multiply here, right? It's really easy. All we got to do is we have to show columns which have to be multiplied, not single rows like in Excel. In Excel, you would pick, for example, you'd be like G2 multiplied, cell G2 multiplied by cell H2, whatever, right? You will be multiplying these two cells. But if you notice, right, if you see here, these cells in Power BI are locked. You can't really do anything. I mean, I can't really delete this cell. I can't change it to 1 or whatever, to any other number, to any other value. All the values, individual values in rows are locked in. We have an individual column, which is the smallest unit of operation, and then we have tables, which are comprised of columns. And then we have data models that are comprised of tables. In Excel, however, right, the smallest unit of information is a cell. That's probably the main difference between Excel and Power BI. All right, let's go back building our column. I didn't build it till the end. Okay, it will be revenue. We'll find quantity. Simply multiply by price. And when I click OK, so as a result, what Power BI did is it went to these two columns. Because rows are matching, Power BI went and multiplied every single row by every single row from the other column. And then I got all of the information that I need. So what I really wanted to show here was the philosophy of Power BI, the philosophy of DAX, and how it is different from Excel, right? We saw that Excel is, in the example with Excel, right, it was a regular cell-based operations, which we did, right? We multiplied a cell to another cell, and then we had result, and then we drag that formula down, right? We can drag that formula to the right, whatever. The smallest unit of operation is a cell. And we saw that in Power BI, it's all about columns and tables. The smallest unit of information is a column, and then we have tables built from columns. I think what's really important here to remember is that because values in columns are locked in, right? Individual values are locked in, you can't really change them. I think the column-based structure really helps to avoid typos and manually made mistakes. You know, very often what happens in Excel is someone would get in into data and accidentally change a cell or two, and then the whole model just can go bananas. With the columnar data, the chances of happening that are definitely smaller, because first of all, there will be a much smaller number of columns than there are individual cells in Excel, right? That's obvious. And second of all, if one of your columns goes missing or there's an extra column in your data, then you will immediately notice that and take care of that. It's just easier to notice an extra column than see all the changes in a cell. All right, this was the first introduction to DAX. In next videos, we're going to look at some more DAX formulas and actually dive a little bit deeper into more calculated columns and more measures. Until then, take care of yourself, and if you can, of someone else too. Consider subscribing to my channel, and see you soon.